Want to call to order the meeting of the Livingston Parish Ordinance Committee for March 4, 2019. Ms. Sandy, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Mack, Mr. Harris,
Here.
Mr. Wascom,
Here.
Mr. Talbert.
Here. Start off with item 3, review and discussion recommendations of ordinances, old business. A would be the safety regulations. Y'all can all find in your packet on the right the ordinance that we were gonna introduce tonight, so it doesn't have a number. Basically, there is a safety regulations that we currently have in place, and if you look at the red, there's some differences. Y'all don't have one? Angie, you got
Their
some
press
copies?
packets right there.
If you go down to, let's see, ABA, it says that the layouts will go in PDF format, and then in the previous, it was 30 days prior to the beginning of business operations, and this is gonna be 2 days prior to final inspections. And there was some question based on, we were talking about submitting the whole set of plans, and Mr. Idell with Alvin Fairburn had asked us, said some of those plans could become cumbersome. So in our conversation with Mr. Harrell, he needs a floor plan layout shall include the following. And the list was A, all windows and doors with size of each, FDC connection locations, all fire hydrant locations, sprinkler riser room locations, and locations of connections providers of gas, water, and electrical. So that's what they're looking for, a floor plan of the commercial building, and then all those related items, so that we wouldn't have a 100-page document. We would have a document that identified those particular areas. And this is something that's on the books now, but has not been utilized too much, mainly because of the 30-day notification. If somebody didn't make it in 30 days, they came for a final inspection, then we couldn't, under this ordinance, we couldn't do it. So
Right.
It's something that hadn't been, so we got it to a manageable 2 days. Plus, Mark said, he said it's a download, it's a PDF that's gonna get downloaded to my office, that I'm just gonna upload on a statewide website that would allow first responders to access any floor plan on any particular address. So Mark thought that 2 days was much better than 30 for him. So is there any comment or any questions or any suggestions from anybody in the audience or from the committee? Anybody want to make a recommendation on this to recommend this to the council for introduction tonight?
I'll offer that.
Got a motion by Mr. Harris?
I'll second that. I thought it was a good ordinance.
Is there any objection? None, so moved. We're gonna make a recommendation out of the committee and introduce that tonight. Moving on to B, 3B, Shane's not gonna make it tonight. Until that new bridge gets built, he's gonna have a hard time getting here for 5:15. so, from Plaquemine, so, hold on one second. Hey, Mark, I'm in a committee. Can I call you back? That was Mr. Harrell. I didn't know if it was about that or not. C, limits on fill material on residential lots. This is gonna be kind of long and drawn out. Do y'all care if we move to 4A and discuss Tracy's committee on the committee he wanted to put forth to look at the land use part of the master plan? Can we do that first, guys, and then come back to the field thing? Is that good?
Yeah, that's
Sandy, can we just do that?
Here's-
Tracy, you want to come on up and talk about the, it's titled here the Master Plan Review Committee, and I guess that's kind of somewhat of a accurate statement, but really maybe a little bit misleading.
Well, it is,
So-
Tracy Garlinghouse, 28300 Magnolia Drive, Walker, Louisiana. As you all know, we're wanted to form a committee to review the master plan as it was written before by the previous council, in the hopes of putting the parish on a platform to where we can go forward for future work. And, certainly zoning is one of the issues, but there are many issues involved with the master plan. So, in discussion with other councilmen, we decided to put together a committee in order to review the master plan, since anything that has changed since the time of when it was written, what should be moved up front first, what should be changed. Certainly, I would imagine some things have changed to some degree, and just review the whole document in its entirety in order to kind of more tailor fit it to where the parish is now as it sits today. So, in that respect, I got input from each councilman. We want everybody to have a say, someone to say on the board, and informing this board on how we will proceed in those changes, and just an overview before we decide or before we act on anything in that nature. So I would like to, I guess I'll have a smaller committee, but we don't. We have 9 members, and I have the 9 members. I can list them, or I can just, I don't know, what, Mr. Talbert, should we list the names? Should we, for the record, or should we just wait for?
The council meetings really where you
Okay.
appoint them,
So yeah, all right, thank you. So really, that's it. Form this committee so they can go over what the master plan entails, refresh everybody's mind. Mr. Burns was gracious enough to be on the committee as my appointment. He's probably forgot more about it than most people know. He was on the original one. Were you not, Mr. Burns, you were on the original, helping put together the master plan? Original? Yeah, I'm asking, were you originally involved in how that was?
I was the chairman of the planning commission during the time. We had 3 hearings for a year, and then we had 6 hearings around the parish, and then I went to most of it.
Okay. So I guess in short, he's uniquely qualified to be on this committee for me. So instead of sitting there, being on the committee myself, I put him in there for my case. So, is there any questions?
Good choice.
So, Sandy, talking about, you think master plan review committee is a good name for it? Is that what we want to call it, just a master plan review committee, or do you have something else in mind? How do you want to?
What you want to call it?
I mean,
Like an official title?
yeah, I'm okay with that.
Let's take
Master
the
plan.
and out, just master plan review committee, and we've discussed, I think, what they're charged with is kind of reviewing the master plan, but mainly implementing looking at the land use part of it. I assume, is that priority land use of it, or reviewing the whole master plan?
Well, I believe that everything I believe we should adopt the master plan in its entirety, but I might be convinced otherwise. Other reason why we should have this committee in place. But my primary thought process right now is for what we need to do for the zoning aspect of it. So I want like-minded people who see this as an avenue to go forward, but it's such a broad term. Even the master plan is a very exhaustive, large document that I believe that it would be justified to have a committee to just review what's already in place, and then adjust things accordingly, amongst them, let them get together and discuss it, how should we change this? Should we keep this the same? But yes, I mean, personally, I believe that the zoning aspect should be at the forefront of that.
So I guess what we're talking about doing is presenting this committee wants to present a resolution to the council tonight, or coming out of this committee, a resolution to the council, a recommendation to form the master plan review committee, and there'll be a committee of 9 members. And I think actually, Tracy, in talking around, you've got a list of 9 people that we could start off. This will be the original 9 members that we start off with tonight. We'll put them in that resolution. And I know the parish president has a representative. We got the planning commission, and then several councilmen. In an effort to try to keep it small, I deferred not to have an appointment because this thing could get tremendously large. And so I think in an effort to try to you know, keep it manageable and have representation throughout the parish. I think, Tracy, you kind of talked about 9, and I'm kind of satisfied, you know, with that. I mean,
Yes.
and ultimately, you know, if every councilman wanted a representative, and then, you know, it could get 11, 12, 13 people of all these different organizations. So, you know, I think 9 is the number we're at right now that everybody agrees upon. So I'd like to, we have a motion to offer a favorable recommendation on that resolution of a master plan review committee to be established with 9 members.
I'll move, we do that.
Got a motion by Mr. Loscom?
I'm wondering if we should,
I'd like to just say one thing.
Go ahead, Mr. Harris.
I want to second that motion, but, anyway, one thing that we need to really stress about this whole deal is it's mostly for commercial areas. When you get out where it's more rural, a lot open land, stuff like that, it can also benefit those people. I mean, if they don't want something put out there, then they can come back and say, we don't need this out here in our part of the world, you know.
Well, I believe as a community as a whole, there's no downside.
Yeah.
You know, there is a misconception out that it is.
You're right.
But
I
there's
understand that.
no downside.
Yeah.
This right here will allow the parish to implement, you know, put things in place that'll allow it to grow responsibly, and, you know, work toward what's better for everybody.
Well, it's a win-win situation.
It absolutely is, you know, and I can't think of no reason why that this shouldn't go forward. You know. But the committee's job isn't to make it go forward. You know, ultimately, you know, that's not theirs is to overview what is currently there in that document, and, you know, basically tweak it for our sake, you know, for the parish's sake and for the council's sake.
In the past, the people was actually saying, I don't know, if y'all had this problem or not, but the people said, well, I don't want somebody running around telling me what I can do with my property, you know. But hey, sometimes you have to tell them if they don't want to do what's right.
Well, and I mean, not to, you know, go in great detail on that. A lot of people do say that,
Yeah.
but then when something comes in that doesn't fit,
Right.
you know,
Then they come back to you.
Then
Why y'all let-
ultimately those same people want you to be able to tell someone else what they can
Yeah.
do with their property, and, you know, that's the catch-22 of that scenario.
And I
You
think
know,
dancing around the subject, we all know the issues basically are gonna rely on the rural areas. I mean, there are people that just, and not throwing, Shane said it in the article that we read in the newspaper the other day, you know, talking about his rural area. But in essence, rural zoning somewhat, if you look at the recommendations for rural zoning in here, and you look at recommendations of rural zoning in other areas, rural zoning's kind of wide open, but it does have some restrictions on density with respect to residential. It doesn't say you can't put a subdivision in a rural area. There's some density requirements.
Right.
There's some types of businesses that you know, you've got to be zoned out of rural. And so if you think back along some of the lines of what we've dealt with in the last 3 years, you know, there were some areas that if they would have been zoned rural, the residents around them would have had a little traction in trying to, you know, address some of their concerns, yet they could have utilized their property, you know, depending on what they want to do. And then there's always the option to come get something rezoned at a later date. So I think that, you know, there's going to be an education process, and hopefully there'll be enough of these meetings take place, and we'll have enough media coverage and participation that, you know, people will become more comfortable with the term and realize that depending on where you're zoned and what your property area is and how some of these, you know, restrictions are laid out in these zoning areas, that I think you'll become more comfortable and realize the benefit, you know, as a whole.
Well, and, you know, as an example, you know, there was a time not too long ago when the city of Walker was not zoned, and they went through the process to zone the city, and, you know, there was an outcry of people who didn't want their area zoned, didn't want the cities, and didn't want their property zoned. But, you know, they've done it, and like I've said before, you know, the sun came up the next day, the apocalypse didn't happen, and they're better off, the city's better off for it. Just the same with Denham Springs.
Let me make a comment. You know, Denham Springs had zoning since as far as I can remember. Let me just say that I don't think zoning is a fix-all.
Oh, it absolutely is not.
And, you know, you still have problems with zoning just as much as you do not having zoning. People still, and I say that because, and I'm fine, I think it's a step in the right direction. But in essence, we have a type of zoning that people are required to come get permits. People have to come to the council to get variances for certain things. And it's kind of going to be the same thing. When you have zoning, it just gives another venue for government to help control a variance, or because they'll want to get something rezoned to fit their application. And it has its good, but it's not a fix-all. That's what I'm trying to say. It still has its share of problems.
Absolutely.
And so I don't want to think, you know, that this is gonna set us, you know, in our lazy boy. We're still gonna have to answer problems, and, because we'll have more decisions to make, and that's fine.
Well, there is no one-size-fits-all. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead, you're
Yeah,
right.
there's no one-size-fits-all for anything. But I believe that the parish as a whole is at a disadvantage more times than, you know, not when you're faced with an issue. We are at a disadvantage. And whether you're for small government, big government, whatever, I mean, government is there to help the public with issues. Right now, I believe this, you know, well, not this body, but the council is at a very strong disadvantage in certain situations where we cannot stop something that everyone or most people realize is a bad situation. You know, I could list some examples, but
But there's been things that we have stopped,
Yes.
and we don't have zoning. So
That's
I'm
correct.
just saying, you know.
But it is, you know,
Right.
and I don't want to. I guess I don't want to get into a long discussion about it. But you know, in the situation where, you know, in Mr. Lobel's district, when they wanted to do the firing range, you know, that was stopped. But the only reason that was stopped was because the guy doing it just said, "Well, I don't want to do it if the people don't want to do it."
And
Make no mistake, he could have done it.
And make no
Could have
mistake,
done it.
there was an ordinance in place to address firing ranges. If there would have been no ordinance, you know what I'm talking about?
Sure,
There was-
sure,
There
right.
were some
Then he could have done
guidelines
it,
he had to
right,
meet,
yeah.
and so we were able to hold his feet to the fire. If there'd have been no guidelines set forth, there'd have been absolutely no control. And Mr. Burns had the perfect analogy. You know what I'm talking about, or the perfect example, the fact that if they want to build a dynamite plant next to you, you got little or no control over that, you know, in this parish, as long as you don't need a waiver.
Right.
And so I think that, you know, that's an interesting concept that people ought to always think about with
Right.
respect to that. But anyway, if nobody's got anything else, we got a motion, we have a second. If there's no objection, then we're gonna make a recommendation to the council through resolution tonight to create a master plan review committee with 9 members, and Mr. Girlinghouse tonight will list those 9 members. I think there might be a couple up in the air that he might be waiting for other councilmen to get here. If not, he might just list them. But anyway, he'll have those 9 members tonight.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Tracy. Let's move back to 3C.
Call for a vote.
Well, there's no objection, so we don't have to vote on it. 3C, limits on fill material on residential lots. We discussed this a little bit last week. Got a few articles in the paper talking about it. I know I've received a couple phone calls with some, you know, comments one way or the other, about different things, and I guess we can start hammering on some of this stuff a little bit. We'll probably have an ordinance in 2 weeks that'll lay out some specifics, but I guess we can start off with, initially, what we're talking about is lots. Limiting fill on lots to 36 inches. That's the basis of what this ordinance is gonna be about. Now, there seems to be some concern about, is it residential lots, is it commercial lots, is it engineered lots? And so those are some things we can talk about. But basically, you know, it's lots. If you have a lot that is, then what we're interested in doing is talking about limiting them field to 36 inches. You know, it can't extend more than 24 inches past the slab with a 3-to-1 slope. Can't be placed any closer to a property line than 10 foot. And that you should have a swell that's in that 10-foot buffer zone of placed dirt in the property line to collect water so as not to put it on your neighbor. And then, of course, if your slab footer doesn't go 12 inches into undisturbed soil, then we need to have a compaction test on the land prior to construction. Somebody said, what about commercial? Well, you know, every commercial lot in this parish, every commercial business in this parish has an engineered drainage study tool. Am I correct, Morgan, in saying that? You know, so in essence, if you have an engineered drainage study, then necessarily the 36 inches doesn't need to apply, because the drainage study is not gonna let you negatively impact your neighbor. They asked about development of subdivisions. You know, subdivisions have an engineered drainage study, and so consequently, you know, if your subdivision's engineered and you've had a drainage impact study and we know you're not negatively impacting your neighbor, then it wouldn't apply to that. Now, it would apply to the lot being sold in the subdivision. You know what I'm saying? That individual lot would still fall under those requirements of a 36-inch, you know, maximum amount of dirt. There was a question or a recommendation made, and I guess we're gonna have to ask for some input from some engineers, because I don't know. If I had a lot, let's say I got a half-acre lot somewhere, and I need 4 foot of fill on it, would we be better served allowing that if the engineering was done, you know, if a drainage impact study was done on that specific lot? Or would we be better served to limit it at 3 foot no matter what? Do you have any comment, Chad, Morgan? Y'all wanna come up and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, I think, good evening, guys. Yeah, I think a drainage study could cover that. I mean, I think it may be a situation where you can need 4 feet, and it's a BFE thing that you gotta get it above that anyway or something, and, the drainage study could, you know, offset any impacts that height may rise, or, you know, they may put a pond, they may put the swales in, they may need to put a ditch in to get the water where it doesn't hurt somebody adjacent to it. That's the whole point of all this anyway.
So my question, I guess that's what we need to talk about is, you know, originally we were talking about limiting fill, so it could become a point that economically, it might be cheaper to spend the you know, $2,500, $3,000 on a drainage impact study on your residential lot to put another foot of fill in versus, you know, having to go to pier and beam or, you know, a chain wall with a brick ledge or whatever, you know, a different type of foundation. Am I correct or not correct?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, economically, the guy let's say it's a private residence that wants to raise his house up a bunch. Maybe he does need to hire an engineer just to prove he's not gonna hurt somebody getting past the 36 inches. If you stay down, you know, below the 36, do the pier and beam or whatever else, and he wouldn't have to go outside of that 3-to-1 slope and all the other things you were just speaking about.
So
I agree with that.
I think in essence, we're not really taking any property out of commerce. And if you really want to choose to haul the dirt in to make your lot, as long as, I think the whole purpose of this is the engineering impact on your neighbors, what we've all talked about. And I know that there's the floodplain concept and everything else, but until we look at floodplain management, you know what I'm talking about? It's gonna be hard to control, you know, what dirt can be brought into a floodplain and not. So I think initially, this initial step of limiting fill is kind of where we're at this point in time. Am I right or wrong, or?
No, I think that's right, Gary. I think that's the initial step that you can make before you get into a field mitigation situation. But, you know, just to point out for your subdivisions, those lots are supposed to drain, you know, like a turtleback situation. In most cases, it's like a turtleback, you drain to the back and to the front. And you need to keep that same pattern going, whether you're going 3 feet up or you're going 2 feet up or whatever, you know. So anyway, I think the cases where you get into issues too is where a subdivision may be old, but all the lots didn't get developed. You come and add a house, and then that's the cases where these guys wanna just build it up because they feel like it, you know? But it's not required, because you know, to meet BFE, you know, it would still be about the same where the other houses are at.
So while we're talking about this, while we're talking about this particular situation in Phil, are we gonna limit, I mean, necessarily, you know, if base flood, if you only need to raise your lot a foot to make the base flood, are we gonna allow 3 foot of fill to, you know, I mean, you know what I'm talking about? I mean, the whole purpose of, the whole purpose of the fill is to get you above base flood, or a foot above base flood, or whatever, you know, the requirement is. So my question is, do we wanna address base flood in this ordinance and say that if you're already at base flood, you can't necessarily pile dirt up on it?
Man, I don't know about that one. I would almost.
I mean, I'm just asking, I mean, from an
Yeah.
engineering point of view.
Yeah, from an engineer standpoint, I mean, I think, I think as long as they meet y'all's code on whatever it needs to be, a foot above, I mean, at base flood, you know, city Denham's a foot above, you know, wherever y'all's code is, it needs to meet that. But if these people are, you know, these individuals are willing to build above that, I think they need to have that right unless you do set the 3 foot limit. You know, I mean, they just might want to be safer and bring it up 2 more feet. But I mean, if you guys want to limit it to where it's not crazy and they come up 6 feet, and the next thing you know, you got a house on stilts over here.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Well, I think the only problem with that is, in some subdivisions, you know, if they meet the base flood level, 1 foot above or whatever it is, and then they go up another 2 or 3 feet, then what about the neighbors? They're gonna
That's
be
right.
putting all the water on the neighbors.
Well, that's what Gary's talking about. If they're doing it more than 3, then you need to start looking at, you know, maybe the engineer needs to see where the water's really going and not dumping it on his neighbor.
I had a call just this afternoon while I was in here about somebody that's
Putting in,
just putting in a lot of dirt, you know, and they're afraid it's gonna flood the neighbors.
yeah. No, I mean, that's why we're talking about all this, I think, because, you're not really keeping the same drainage pattern that was originally drawn up when that subdivision was
Right.
originally, designed, because when I say turtleback, you shouldn't have water going sideways, you should be going front to back, so, that's what's
yeah,
happening with it.
and I'm gonna be quite honest. I'm gonna tell you what really spurred my interest in this so much is over on Saray Place. I mean, we got some hot lots that have been, you know, vacant for years, and all of a sudden the guys are coming in there. We got 6 foot piles of dirt, you know, and basically there's no place for that dirt. I mean, those lots are sloped to their neighbor's property line, and it identified to me a serious issue that we have, you know, and it's something that's, you know, since the flood has really made itself, you know, pretty noticeable, and so that's kind of brought it to my attention. So,
Yeah, I think y'all need to make sure that, if the maps, you know, if the base flood elevation gets revised, that, and it is more than 3 feet that they gotta bring in fill, then they need to be allowed to do that, right? So, I mean, that maybe needs to be a caveat in there that, if base flood is more than 3 feet, then that property owner is, you know, allowed to bring it up higher than that. That might be one exception for that, you know?
okay. Any other comment from the public? Any comment from the council on this particular subject?
I have a question if I can.
Come on up, Mr. Martin, Martian,
Mr. Marshall.
like the purple Martian thing.
Gaten
Correct.
Smith, 9295 North Street. Where I live used to be marsh. We used to walk around and hunt in there in knee-deep water. Well, they came in, they built a subdivision, and they drained it. Well, 2 things happened. First thing, the water went somewhere, generally downriver. The other thing is, water sits on the ground, and pretty soon it soaks into the ground, into our aquifer. If we drain all our water off too quick, we won't have our water level under the ground there. But the other thing is you haul in dirt over here and your drainage study is done to drain. How far does that drainage study go? Does it go 5 miles down the way, 6 miles, or does it just go 500 feet?
Well, but prior to the last change, it was basically at the outfall. Now we are looking at the upstream and downstream impact of the areas that we know have a problem. So after the last change, then you are getting some upstream and downstream look. And I think it depends on the drainage situation. I mean, the engineers in this parish know where the drainage problems are. You know, the three areas covered by drainage districts, those districts really have a good idea. And they have to comment on every set of plans, don't they, Chad? Every set of plans. So basically, you know, there are areas that you can build and we know there's no impact to drainage. And there are other areas that you know that you got a problem before you start. And so I think the engineer basically now, in this last revision to the drainage impact study ordinance and the subdivision ordinance, we gave the engineer the right to ask for an upstream and downstream look if they have a concern about where that fill is. And I guess that, you know, if you've ever thought about like a aquarium full of water, you know what I'm talking about, and you put dirt in it and draw that line, if you pull some dirt out, the water level's gonna go down. But if you add more dirt, the water level's gonna go up. So that's where we talk about floodplain management. If, you know, we could theoretically say that if you put dirt in AE, it's gotta come out of AE. Or if you put dirt in X, it's gotta come out of X, you know, but we're not ready for that yet. We don't have the capability of dealing with that. So I think we're trying to get a start here to do some control, but, you know, there are some floodplain management mitigation issues that could be really impactful. I'm just not sure that, well, I mean, we're having concern over whether we're gonna limit somebody's 3 foot of fill, much less tell them where they gotta dig the dirt. You know what I'm saying?
Well, my concern is like I say, we're raising the marsh, not allowing anything to go. And money is the driving force behind a lot of this, because people want to build houses, they want their property to be dry. I know I don't want to walk across my yard and have wet feet whenever I get to the other side, even though I still do it. But I mean, my concern is, are they looking at it for a good of everybody, or are they looking at it, it's gonna make us money, we're gonna get here at this stage of the ball game? And again, I'm not against the money making, because that's the capitalistic way. But I'm concerned about filling in all these little marsh holes, our water not going back in our water table, and pretty soon that water's gonna go somewhere.
Well,
And it's a difficult situation, and that was my question, so.
I got you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other comment? Come on up, Mr. O'Neill.
Larry O'Neill, Freddie Amick. To add to what he said, when you're putting field dirt in anywhere in the parish, and you're limited to 3 feet, which is similar to what some of the other parishes do, and he said that water has to go somewhere. You know where that water goes? Goes downhill.
Right.
And southern part of Livingston Parish is downhill from up here where most of the development is. So when you put the rooftops, you put the asphalt, you put the concrete down, and the field dirt, the cumulative effect on it is causing a huge problem for the southern Livingston part, southern part of the parish. We always have to take that into consideration. And as you mentioned about the floodplain management, that in some of the areas, and I think I talked to you on the phone about it, is if they're in the certain flood zones, that's specifically A and AE, that the field dirt probably is not a good use of the territory. That you're actually causing more problems than with just the field dirt.
No.
So you have to look at it in all different aspects of it.
Oh, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I understand. I think that sometimes you gotta take baby steps. You know what I'm talking about? I think you gotta move, you gotta get something moving in a particular direction.
Yeah, and I think I think the 3 feet is a good starting point, and to say limit it irrespective of 3'6", not 3 feet. And if they wanna go higher than that, then they do the chain wall or do the post and pier, something like that.
Okay.
Because there's a reason behind using only 3 feet. It's to protect your neighbors, and your neighbors extend through the whole parish.
Right.
So you might be hurting the people north of you, but definitely hurting the people south of you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Any other comment? entertain a motion for adjournment?
Um,
Are you-
yeah, so is this an ordinance that you've put together?
No,
Gary?
that is an Ascension Parish ordinance. And there's some, I just gave it to you because it talks about, only because it talked about the field. They have a floodplain management program and they have some credits and other stuff that, there's some things that are Greek to us. I didn't mean, I don't want to address all of that.
Okay.
It was really to talk about the initial part, to show you their wording on the 3-foot fill on a particular lot. It wasn't to address the whole thing because they're doing some things over there that we hadn't even started to look at. So even though we might want to do that, we don't have a flood main, a plan that we could start something like that at this point in time. So we're moving forward with baby steps and you know, where we're talking about whether we're gonna limit fill to 3 foot on lots, they're talking about in certain zones having 0 fill. So, you know, they're a little bit further along than us, but we just got their ordinance because it did have some good wording with respect to 3 foot. Yeah, we were just hashing out what we might want to include. I think we've kind of figured out, the girls kind of figure out where it needs to go in our regulations, and we're just
I
kind
would
of.
like to, if you would, make sure Miss Sandy gets that recording of what Mr. Bacchus said, that putting a hard limit might be a problem, because, just, if you would, just make that part of the notes of the meeting, and that, I mean, that's very important what he said, that putting a hard limit, I mean, the drainage study is absolutely important. I think that needs to be done no matter what we do, if someone's gonna bring fill in. But to put a hard limit on what someone could do on the property, I think is walking a fine line.
Well,
And I think that's what Mr. Bacchus said. So however he said it, if you would just make that part of the minutes, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Anything else, you guys need to say, Mr. Harris? You want to make a motion now?
To adjourn,
Yeah.
I'll make that motion.
Got a motion by Mr. Watkins, second by Mr. Harris. No objection?